Hello YouTube. Hope you're having a great day today. Today I want to look at one of the classics of horror, Arthur Machen, The Great God Pan, which is considered to be one of the greatest horror stories ever written. It's written in the 1890s by Welsh author Arthur Machen. We'll take a look at who he is and then take a look at the story. And I'm going to be honest with you, this is going to be probably one of the first reviews that I'm doing for you, where I'm taking something that is supposed to be classic top 10 work, really, really great. And I don't agree necessarily with it. It's not bad. I wasn't bored, but it wasn't something that I think was as good as I've heard that it was going to be. But again, I'll show it to you. It does do some interesting things. It has a strong influence on the horror genre and such. So we'll take a look at Arthur Machen's The Great God Pan here in a moment. But start off, who is Arthur Machen? He is a spiritualist who's writing in the same time as Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, Oscar Wilde, Bram Stoker, a lot of those sorts of writers from the sort of British Isles, many of whom believe kind of in spiritualism as sort of an alternate view of history and sort of some religious views that ghosts were real, things were really happening, and such, and that a lot of these sort of older kind of pagan ideas were true. There was a truth to them and such, and he's a member of that sort of spiritualist sort of view of people who are kind of a lot of writers and famous people at that time. So he's kind of in that kind of camp. He's a Welsh writer. He's going to start writing in the 1890s. And will write for a while. A lot of his stuff is considered by a lot of people who love horror to be really, really good. He was kind of received by many people at the time, like Oscar Wilde, for example, loved his works at the time. But a lot of people didn't like it that much. And so, but he kind of had a little bit of a revival in the 20s because he had a lot of famous people out there that were reading his stuff and loving it, particularly H.P. Lovecraft, who said that a lot of this stuff was really, really good. And he put there, he was not the only one. A lot of other contemporary writers of Lovecraft writing in the 20s and 30s really enjoyed Arthur Machen too. H.P. Lovecraft actually wrote this, he was a great letter writer. He actually wrote these letters where he basically spelled out what he would put in a horror collection if he were to ever edit one. And he includes multiple stories by Arthur Machen, who I think is the only person he actually has 2 or 3 stories from. That's how much he appreciated Arthur Machen. And while I can see where he's coming from, I think, and I've read a lot of Arthur Machen's stories. Like I had these various collections of many of his short stories and such. I don't think he's as good as people have said, but he's worth checking out. If you like him better than me, that's great. And feel free after this review to leave your comments below if you think that Arthur Machen is better than I do, or if you think this story in particular is better than I do, then that's fine. Feel free to let me know in the comments below. I'm going to try to keep this review spoiler-free because, you know, a lot of works, particularly horror works, have a sort of once you get past the first few chapters, you don't want to, things are happening, and particularly it's very common in a horror genre to have an ending that goes into an interesting direction, or that scares you, or that doesn't leave you satisfied. That's very common for horror. For example, the book Dracula, which if you haven't, I'm going to spoil it here. You're going to find out, guess what? They're going to follow Dracula, some of them die, right, yada, yada, yada. So there's lots of those sorts of horror stories out there like that. So if you've never read The Great God Pan by Arthur Machen, I'm not going to spoil what's going to happen here in this review. I'll try to keep them relatively spoiler light. Although if you do want to talk about that more, I'm happy to talk about it in the comments below. If there was a part near the ending or the ending itself you would like to discuss more, happy to do that with you. Okay, so let's take a look at The Great God Pan. The Great God Pan is basically going to start off with this 2 gentlemen. One of them is going to be with his friend. His friend's this doctor who's come up with this scientific experiment that he thinks is going to allow people to kind of see the spiritual world. He takes this lady, Mary, and he will basically do a slight brain surgery with her and then kind of record the results. And at first, she seems really amazed, like the spiritual world is this awesome thing that she's seeing for the first time, and such. But then she's going to go crazy and insane because of that, having seen the spiritual world and so forth. The story is going to basically move forward a little bit in time. We're going to be introduced to a female character named Helen, who's going to be this small little girl. She's growing up. She has a lot of evil in her, it appears. She's going to do a lot of evil things. We're going to be following her for part of the book, following her things that she's doing according to the main characters that you were introduced to earlier in the story, and following them and their sort of encounters with this girl Helen and so forth. And Helen, you're ultimately she's going to find out, she's going to die, you're going to find out some stuff about her, and that's the end of the story. Now, it's going to do a lot more than that. Again, I'm trying to keep it very, very spoiler light, because in case you want to read the story, you've never heard of Great God Pan. But what the Great God Pan does is, and he's going to tell you this here right in the very beginning, is this idea of kind of experiencing what the world's really like, and you can see it in the first scenes with Mary, when she is kind of introduced to this, seeing all what the world is really like and what this sort of spiritual world really is, and you can see her kind of initially be very much like, this is really cool. This is a wonderful thing. It's awesome. You can see it on her face. But then as she gets more and more exposed to it, it becomes more and more horrible. And the things that she is seeing are becoming more and more horrible. And that's kind of where the story is going to follow and do some things as a result of that. But that sort of central core is definitely one that has sort of really sort of challenged horror writers and was very horrifying for people who were reading the story at the time Arthur Machen had written it in the 1890s. One of the things that really kind of stays with you is that concept, and other authors are going to pick up on that and use that as part of their work. For example, H.P. Lovecraft will be using that as a part of his his Cthulhu mythos, and actually some works outside of the Cthulhu mythos, of this idea that as you are learning more and more about what's really happening, you're going to be more and more likely to, you're going to go insane. You're going to sacrifice your sanity to do so. There are truths that man was not meant to know, and that's definitely where Arthur Machen's horror is kind of, for this story, The Great God Pan, kind of sits. There are truths that man was not meant to know, and the spiritual world and its reality is one of them. We are so much safer and contented in who we are. So there's that element to it, and that's definitely, that aspect to it definitely, I think, really makes this work kind of sing, and gives it something that really can kind of connect with to today. That's definitely one of the earliest times you're going to come across that sort of concept in a horror story. It definitely resonates. So I'm going to give Arthur Machen lots of props for that. Now, I do think his writing style is not a good fit for the story, and that's where my own issues with it come up. I do want somebody who has great ideas. He's got great ideas, but I'm not a fan of where he goes with some of those ideas in the story, some of the details, and I don't think his writing style is a perfect match to what he's trying to do with the mood and such. But be that as it may, that's Arthur Machen. Again, great ideas, great concept. It's a short story, although it's longer in length. It's a short story. It won't take you too long to finish. In my copy of this, it's about 50 pages long. This is an oversized book, and it probably took me about an hour and a half to read. Arthur Machen is not a fast writer. Sometimes you might come across a story to be 50 pages, be like, well, I can read that very quickly. Nope, not this one. Arthur Machen is not that sort of a writer. You're going to need to take some time with it, and that's fine. An hour and a half for a classic classic horror short story from the 1890s. That's fine. It's going to be fun. And again, you're going to really, if you enjoy horror, particularly older horror stories that kind of come before horror was codified. You couldn't write a horror story today after horror has been written for such a long time that isn't part of the tropes of horror, right? You can't write a zombie story without writing a zombie story that has all sort of tropes of a zombie story. Similarly, with so many other things that horror does, whether it's a stalker, whether it's a psychological horror, whatever horror story you wanted to write, you couldn't do it without being a part of the tropes that have already been established for a long, long period of time. But the great thing about going to the early horror story stuff is that it's pre-trope. And so you're getting a lot of these great stories that are being written just because they're good. Because they have a good idea. And this is, Arthur Machen's Great God Pan is a great idea. It's that kind of an early sort of pre-trope story. The idea of there are secrets that man, we're not meant to know in the spiritual world, and what it does with our main characters, Mary, Helen, our two main males, and the other folks too, that are involved in the story. So it does have this sort of an interesting place that it goes. Arthur Machen is free to do that because he actually is doing this before those tropes came about. This is his idea. So he's free to explore that as much as possible. So the story will take some time to read, like about 90 minutes or so, but he's doing a lot of stuff with it, and he'll connect to the dots very nicely, and such. So it's worth reading. I wouldn't consider it one of my top 10, 20, or 30 horror short stories out there, but I've read it a couple times now. It's not a bad story. I do enjoy it, and I enjoy what he's trying to do. But again, I just don't think it's. I think there's some details in the story that I'm not a super big fan of, and I'm also not a big fan of his writing style as married to this particular story. So anyway, let me know if you've read it. Let me know what you think about the comments below. Do you agree with my review? Do you think it's okay but not amazing? Or do you think it's, this is really good, Abe? Let me know. Or if you think, pass, I read it. Let me know what you think in the comments below. I'd love to take a look at that. I will give you a link down there to it in case you want to read it. In case you do want to pick up some time and spend some time and invest in this classic of the genre. If you enjoyed this review, there's going to be a lot more to follow. In fact, this is the first of 3 reviews I'm actually recording this morning over the weekend that are going to be on these older classic fantasies, or horror stories rather, from the 1800s, and that are just these older classic stories, and this is going to be one of them. So if you enjoyed this series, I hope you give me a subscribe button over there, because there's going to be so many more videos to follow that are kind of unlocking and hopefully discussing with you some of the great stories from fantasy, science fiction, and horror. So if you've spent some time with me today, hey, I really appreciate it. Everybody's got some busy lives, and if you invested like 10 minutes in this video, I really appreciate it. So thank you so much.